And just like everyone else, I want to add my voice of concern. I mean, it's a comedy of errors. It's taxpayers' money, and no one seems to worry when it's taxpayers' money. No one seems to be held accountable. No one takes the rap. It's all a report, an eight-page report, and then it's forgotten about. But I don't think it should be forgotten about. There should be lessons learned here. I mean, it's a simple thing here. All goes wrong. There's 2 old printers in there that are out being decommissioned because they're old and decrepit, I suppose. And we're buying a new printer, modern day printer. And it's a simple thing. You don't have to have a master's degree or anything to go into a room, get the dimensions of the printer, the new printer, and the size, height, width, whatever else, how it got in the front door, how it was placed. It was a simple thing. And yet someone this thing went all wrong. And it's cost money. We're talking about hundreds of thousands here of extra money. And someone has to take account of this, and someone is responsible. And the public out there are right. And my colleague here a minute ago said, we have a housing crisis, we have a health crisis, we have everything. And yet money can be wasted like this at LIB. And no one seems to care about it, and no one seems responsible. And I think it is our job here to make sure there is proper accountability for public monies being spent. And this needs to be accounted for more. And someone needs to stand up and take the rap for it. Thank you. I welcome the revenue here, particularly my Kilkenny fellow mate there. I always welcome a Kilkenny man to Dublin. Anyway, just I'm going to start with VAT. And I want to explain what I'm talking about. Discrepancies in VAT and would they value-added tax, as we know it. And I'm particularly asking this question because I was approached by an individual, which I can't name, I won't name the case, but he said that there was a discrepancies in VAT and the way they're being applied in this country, in particular in co-ops. And I think he brought his case to Europe, and you might know his case back 3 or 4 years ago. And I think he won his case in the European Court of Justice and was referred back to the revenue, which nothing ever happened since. And basically, why I'm asking this question: are they an advantage to co-ops that are being VAT, and when an individual farmer, as if being a farmer co-op arrangement, are they advantaged by being in that co-op and refund? What I'm talking about is level playing field or equal treatment. That's what I'm talking about here. And this man seems to think that they weren't, and he was unfairly treated, and he lost his business, and he was trying to compete against people that had an advantage. I just want a general opinion. I'm not talking about the individual case, though, just generally on VAT I want to ask you about, and the way VAT has been applied, and are there discrepancies in the system?
Thanks very much, Deputy. I understand what you're talking about is the interaction of what's called the flat rate.
That's right, flat rate VAT.
For unregistered farmers and the pricing structure that's used within some of the cooperative frameworks for dealing with particular agricultural activity.
That's right.
There was representations made about whether there's an abuse of the flat rate system, and we conducted a study. The sector was the poultry sector.
Yes, right.
And we conducted a study of the pricing mechanism, and the EU VAT rules provide that you can have a flat rate scheme to compensate unregistered farmers for their VAT inputs. But one of the conditions laid down in the VAT directives is that the sector can't overcompensate. And so what we did is we did a study, and then the Minister for Finance brought in a provision in the Finance Act, I'd say it might be 2 years ago, to provide a mechanism to exclude a sector or a subsector of the unregistered farmers sector from the flat rate addition, subject to an analysis by revenue and the establishment of the fact that there was overcompensation. And so that provision was brought in. And
did that rectify? We say if there were a discrepancy,
there's another bit to go on the tail. So once the legislation was brought in, we did a detailed analysis of the sector to establish if there was overcompensation in the sector, And so we have sent our report to the Minister, to Minister for Finance, and it is now with the Minister, and he has to consider. I think, I'm not 100% certain of this, but I think it would have come up in the context of the finance bill, and he acknowledged that he had received the report from ourselves, and again his officials are considering it. So there will need to be a specific provision for the sector, and what that will mean is that unregistered farmers in the poultry, and the poultry industry is really, like, it's interesting in that day-old chicks are hired out nearly, and then the farmer feeds them and grows them, and then they go back to the company, and then they're killed and end up packaged as chicken. And so that is with the Minister to determine whether he'll bring forward a provision to remove the flat rate status from the poultry sector, which will mean that farmers in that sector will have to register for VAT, and then they'll be in the normal system.
Yeah. Well, and were the directive from the European Court of Justice on that case for the revenue for yourselves to take on? There was no recommendations or directives from...
No,
the case didn't direct you to do anything in particular?
No, but the issue is that and there has been a number of your colleagues have made representations and have met some of our officials and about the case and the issue, and the concern is, again, that it may well, the practices in the poultry sector, the concern is if they are brought into some of the other sectors, and now we have this provision which will allow us to do that study of other sectors, and the challenge is for us to know what's going on, because this is all to do with the pricing models, the price of food, the feedstuffs, and all the rest of it. It's not really in the tax system. It's in the commercial contract relationships between the parties.
But there could be an advantage to people within that system. We say through feedstuffs and all that.
There is no doubt that within the poultry sector, the pricing structure allowed for an overcompensation of the VAT for some people who are in that trade.
Do we know, farmers in general, do you know how many farmers are registered for VAT and many are non-registered for VAT? Is that a thing you'd know offhand? You know, farming in general, besides poultry, in general?
I'd know it offhand if I had a little bit of time.
There's
about 110,000 farmers. So most of them are part-time at this stage. There's a very small number of farmers registered for VAT. It's probably less than 10,000. I spent a lot of time in my career in VAT, and I used to know these figures off the top of my head. And we publish a really interesting report on the farming sector and tax, and we updated it recently. And if you like, we'll send on the link to that report.
Okay, and another reason why I'm asking this at the moment, because of the present situation with beef and the feedlots, and that's why I'm coming to it. Okay, we're talking about poultry up to now, but the feedlots, which are mostly owned by factory owners and processors, and which have an advantage in that they're buying off of the farmer, eating these feedlots, they're able to upset the market by having all these cattle in reserve, and they can use to fix prices if they want to, because they have the cattle to do it, and can supply this at the behest of a farmer. Can supply their own beef, which is, of course, the farmer was involved in the beginning with, and rearing and all that. So would this have an implication for that sector, and this VAT? Would that be given an advantage to processors in particular? This VAT that we're talking about, if it's not changed, and that's the one I'm really wanting to get at. That this could be given beef processors an advantage against an ordinary farmer that's trying to fatten cattle, like I do myself, and try to supply from hoof to factory. And these would have an advantage through this VAT thing, and that's what I want to ask you. Are they an advantage there, and should be a loophole closed that they are?
There was a recent parliamentary question about the feedlots in the beef sector, and so far we haven't seen evidence. And the process is different in that a lot of the overcompensation on the poultry was because they were supplying the feedstuffs to the chicken rear.
We're all tied in, yeah.
Whereas with the feedlot stuff, it's a different model. But what we have said, and what we've said in reply to the parliamentary question, and what are very open to, because ultimately we find out things that are happening after the event, because that's the way the tax system works. Tax returns follow the activity, the period for things to be returned. So often the earliest we will be aware of something could well be 2 years, it could be well 2 years in place. And what we're always open to is information on practices in the sector. And so far, and what we said in the parliamentary question is that we have no evidence to date, but we're not. I hope that we're not stupid, that if we know that it's happening in a sector, that we will be keeping an eye on.
Well, that's what I'm going to say. Now that you're aware, we say that will you scrutinise that more so now that you're aware of this and that there's no advantages being taken by processors in particular, or factory owners.
We are aware of the practices that took place in one sector, and we will be actively looking to see if it's taken place in other sectors. But we're also open to information.
Okay, that's done. Your report into the Minister, now I know you don't set policy, that's the Minister's problem. What way would you see of scrutinising it if the Minister had to come back with means and ways of fixing the problem? Would it be to force farmers to register for VAT? Would that
it would remove the flat rate compensation for the sector. So how
that would be a good thing, yeah. I'm a farmer, so that would be a good thing.
I
might be looking for that now.
I was going to explain how the flat rate system works, but then you probably know how it works as well as I do. But basically, the flat rate system works by an addition of a percentage to the price paid by the registered purchaser.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know, it's a 5.8%.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So if an unregistered farmer sells his cattle, he gets an additional 5.8% on the price. And what that is meant to do, it's meant to compensate the farmer for the VAT on the inputs, whether it's on running the farm and the tractor and keeping the thing going.
And all that, yeah.
Well, yeah, feed and feedstuffs where it's not zero rated. And it's calculated based on macroeconomic data across the sector in its entirety, and that's why some farmers register, because if you're a tillage farmer, you probably have more inputs. And mostly the registered farmers are tillage farmers because they have higher vatability.
Fertiliser and all that.
Yeah. And
is feedstuff a zero VAT? Is feedstuff a zero VAT?
Zero rated. Most of it is zero rated. Livestock.
Yeah.
Feedstuff is zero rated for VAT.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Good. Anyway, I'm glad you gave me those few answers. I just wanted to sometimes mention the small, just corporate tax. Quick, this is the last thing, corporate tax, and you spoke about the small already. The 10 billion that was brought in, and 6 billion is from 10 companies. Are you worried, that this is just a temporary kind of a tax? Or 6 billion of money that could have disappeared next year, could have gone down to 2 next year, 0 the year after. Are you worried because there's a lot of money and it could upset our tax returns for any given year over the next 5-6 years? And when you speak about billions, it's serious stuff. Are you worried about, as head of the revenue, and do you think that this is going to be a temporary thing, or will we keep getting this 10 billion or 6 billion, we say, from the big 10 companies? They're probably foreign direct investment companies that are in here. Are they worrying there that we won't get dependent on that, or are dependent on that, the same as we got dependent on the building industry when we went to bust? I'd just like a comment. I know you spoke about it already, but just personally I'd like to hear a comment on that one.
Like as the Minister has said, there'll always be a concern around any sector that is dependent on a small number of large payers. Also be concerned around the idea that international tax, and for the last kind of 5 years, the whole international tax debate is of significance, and there's a lot of developments taking place internationally, and there is no doubt over the the last couple of years, some of the changes in international tax have been to the benefit of Ireland's corporation tax receipts. So, like the Minister has said, he will be careful and cautious. I know that there's a lot of interest in it. Certainly, the figures so far this year suggest that we will be ahead of target for this year again. And I think we just, as a country, have to be very careful about it.
And you wouldn't be afraid that just because of the changes in the international tax laws, and in Europe in particular, that that this money is being, companies are just getting tax compliant, preparing for what's coming down the line, but then it could dry up after, once they become tax compliant, that the monies could evaporate down to 1 or 2 billion a year instead of 10. Would you be worried about that?
I certainly would be worried that it'll be down to 1 or 2. I think that, so who knows where it'll be in 3 years' time, but kind of the figures that we've published over the last number of years show that the top 10 has paid between 37% and 45% of the total CT every year, and that's fairly consistent going back a long time. A lot of those companies have deep roots within Ireland that employ a lot of people, and so I think some of the challenges that will take place over the next number of years may well have an impact on attracting new companies, and that challenge will always be there. I have figures on farmers. So there's VAT registered for 2018. It's a little bit wider than pure farmers because it covers fishery. It's dependent on NACE codes. So for VAT registrations for the agri, forestry and fisheries sector in 2018 are 12,078. So about the 10,000, and that's been fairly consistent going back to when I was dealing with VAT on a full-time basis.
About 10%.
The unregistered farmers, in addition to the flat rate, they also are entitled to claim back VAT on farm buildings and claims for the unregistered. The unregistered farmers had 20,000 claims, totaling 59 million in VAT on capital development and slatted sheds and the rest. You've probably claimed a number of them yourself.
And due to get another claim in.
I can't deal without talking to you about taxpayer details.
Okay, thank you. Then just a few questions. Just on that exact point, you said the report is with the Minister and you went, will that require a statutory instrument?
It will.
It will. In other words, you said 2 years ago there was an amendment in
enabling legislation.
And so it'd be a statutory instrument. So, Deputy Aylward, until such time as there's a statutory instrument on that flat rate VAT issue for the poultry sector, it won't come into effect until a statutory instrument is signed. So that's up to the Minister to do that. But you've hinted that if that was to become necessary in another sector, if I use the word, you almost have the template there now.
Absolutely.
You have the template in place that you could extend it to another sector if needs be. If needs be.
It was a very difficult situation and for people in the sector, and it was a real challenge for us to get to the bottom of the model because it wasn't tax in its normal way. It had to do with commercial pricing and contracts, and but now we have enabling legislation.
Yeah.
Like that is in since 1972, and this was the first time, and the flat rate system has been in. There's been an important sensible way of administering that for unregistered farmers. And
just for people watching, you said when the farmer sells his cattle, he gets the extra 5.8%. Who pays him that 5.8%?
The registered purchaser of, so
that's the mart, or a
factory. Well, if you leave the mart out of it for a minute, but if you were selling to a factory,
yeah,
the factory would pay
plus 5.8.
Would pay the 5.8%.
Okay.
and they would claim back that 5.8% in their VAT return. It's an input credit. So
Fine, we got
the
that.
Exchequer pays it.
Yeah. So we got that. Now the sales through the mart.
Oh, the sales for the mart, it's essentially the purchaser. It's the 5.8% is added in, is added back.
So just to be clear,
mart.
yeah, for people who are not familiar with going to mart, so when a farmer buys an animal at a mart, he knows it's plus 5.8% for VAT. He knows that. He knows that.
Yeah, he gets the 5.8%.
Okay, and one farmer selling to another farmer, sells off.
The farmer sells
to a
to
yearling to another unregistered farmer. What happens?
You see, the process is enabled through the mart. If it goes through the mart, the flat rate system operates. But if I sold directly from farmer to farmer, two unregistered farmers,
as 90% of the mart, as you just said,
the flat rate addition doesn't apply, and this is the challenge or the claim in relation to some of the lots is that the flat rate, the final person gets the full value of the flat rate. So that's the issue that we're looking at. But if so is the farmer better selling his weanling in the mart where he gets plus 5.8% and to another unregistered farmer where he doesn't get the extra 5.8%? You're challenging my recollection of the flat rate system and mart. So if you'd like, I'll give you a detail. I'll give you a clear note rather than. I didn't intend to go in this area. I hadn't intended talking about it.
I guarantee you're paying the same thing anyway, because the farm you're selling to, let's say, get the same price as was on the mart, so you're paying the same thing anyway. The VAT will be included in that price if you're paying from farmer to farmer.
Farmer to farmer, but you might send us a note on the different option. Okay.